Good evening, everybody. I'll call the meeting to order, seeing that we have quorum. I believe we have regrets from two councillors tonight, but we are good to go. I'll begin with a public meeting regarding Grange Street, and I'll read the Gospel according to the Planning Act first. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing, and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning and Development. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be open to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There's also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. An exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates the public meeting and comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine. This business practice has been in place for a number of years and is received by the applicant as efficient customer service and effective use of committee time. Please note that staff use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of all relevant information. Information gathered is then referred back to planning and development staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to the planning committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When the review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city perspective. Following Council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or makes written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So tonight's public meeting and only public meeting is, I'll just scroll down here, concerning 16 Grange Street. So you snuck up on me. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants, and it's my pleasure to present an application for zoning bylaw amendment at 16 Grange Street on behalf of AAP Developments. The purpose of the application is to permit a 5-unit, 2-story dwelling. Our subject site is located in Portsmouth Village. I'm going to use my mouse to try and identify it here. It's located right here, about a block south of King Street West. It is in an area that's primarily residential, but as you can see from the number of labels on the slide, there are a lot of non-residential uses in the area as well. So the site is 1 block south of King Street. That stretch of King Street, that block is commercial in nature along the south side, and that commercial use wraps around Yonge Street to the east of the site, and there's the Portsmouth Tavern is just at the corner, just down the road from the subject site. It's in an area it's in proximity to a lot of park space, a lot of open space. There are 2 community parks within a short walk of the subject site, Garrigan Park and Aberdeen Park. And of course, the site is close to the Waterfront Trail, which provides access to Lake Ontario Park. It's in an area it's very close to a number of major employers like St. Lawrence College, Queen's University's West Campus, the Providence Care Hospital, Beach Grove Complex. And the site is well served in terms of public transit, with express bus routes running along King Street West and regular bus routes running along Union Street and King Street. Looking a little bit closer at the subject site, it's about 678 square meters in area with about 20 meters of frontage on the south side of Grange Street. The site is currently vacant, but there was a triplex on the property until about a year ago. You can see just the proximity to the 2 nearest bus stops on this image as well. So those are a little under 200 meters away at the intersection of Mowat, Union, and King Street. What I want to show here is that this immediate stretch of Grange Street has a real diversity of building forms and topologies. So this is just across the road from the subject site to the north. This is a 3-unit or a 3-story row house with 3 units. Immediately to the east of the subject site on Grange Street is a 1-story single detached dwelling. And you can see from the image that the house is actually built quite close to the property line. It has a good relationship with Grange Street. Now on the west side, we've got a 2-story semi-detached dwelling that's set well back from the street. So just the 3 properties that are closest to the subject site along Grange Street, you can see that they're all different building forms, they're all different typologies. This is what the triplex that used to exist on the subject site. You can see it was a 2-story building. It was set back a bit from the street. And this is what's there now. That triplex was demolished. It was in very bad condition, structurally and interior, so that was the reason for its being removed. From a policy context, in terms of the current land use designation on the subject site, it is designated residential. This is a broad designation that allows a wide range of residential uses, everything from a single attached dwelling to an apartment building. So the proposed use, the 5-unit residential use, is in conformity with the permitted uses in the official plan. In terms of the current zoning, so the site is zoned A5. This is a 1- and 2-family dwelling zone. It limits the number of uses on the site to 2. And you can see, as well as other community facility uses and things like that. I've also shown here some of the performance standards that relate to this A5 zone. So the building height is the 10.7 meters, which is about enough for a 2-story dwelling with a peaked roof. Minimum front yard and rear yard are quite high, they're quite large in the A5 zone, while the minimum side yard is quite small, with an aggregate side yard of 3 meters, meaning that if you were to do a 4-foot side yard on one side, you'd have to do a 6-foot side yard on the other side to get that amount. So the reason that we're asking for a zoning bylaw amendment is because a 1-family and 2-family dwelling zone would not permit the proposed 5-unit dwelling, so we're asking to change the zone. What I want to show here is the elevation. This is the design that was chosen for this particular 5-unit dwelling. So it's proposed to be 5 units, 2 stories tall. The front elevation, the design is very heavily inspired by existing semi-detached dwellings in Portsmouth Village. You can see those here. So there's one on Yonge Street and another on Mowat Avenue. These are more traditional semi-detached dwellings, but you can see how the design has been heavily informed by these existing buildings. In terms of the site plan that's proposed for the site, you can see how it's intended to have 1 driveway on the east side of the subject site. So just imagine the site is inverted. So south is to the bottom, north is to the bottom, excuse me, and south is to the top. So the driveway is on the east side of the house. The main entrance, those 2 doors would actually they would lead to a common kind of vestibule space with the stairs going up and down. The driveway leads to the parking in the rear of the site, so you've got 4 spaces and then a 5th accessible space, so 1 parking space per unit is what's proposed. You can also see in the rear yard, there is some grassed space. There's also a swale proposed for stormwater management. Recognizing that vehicles driving into the rear yard and parking back here could shine light onto the neighboring property to the rear. A 5-foot board fence is proposed along that property line to shield and mask that, to prevent that light spillover when vehicles are pulling in and out. We've also got accesses to the rear of the building shown here. So on the east side, it's proposed to have a unit, and then on the west side, it's proposed to have a common amenity space, an interior amenity space. So that's what we're showing here. So this is the floor plan for the basement. So from the rear, you could access the stairs and access the one residential unit. This is a 2-bedroom unit, which also has an entrance from the front stairwell. And then to the west, on the west side, is the interior amenity space, as well as stairs leading to bicycle parking, which is covered at the rear. So 1 bicycle parking space per unit is proposed. It is proposed to have a little kitchenette and a bathroom inside this amenity space. The idea being that, as I'm sure as one of the challenges that we often face is trying to provide year-round amenity space in this climate. We recognize that in this design, we have an opportunity to provide an interior amenity space that's usable by all the residents of the dwelling at any time of the year. So that's the intention with this amenity space. The first and second floor plans are shown here. Layouts are quite simple. The idea being that 2 bedrooms are proposed in each unit. They're more or less mirrored here. And each unit would have access to a rear deck at the back. In terms of the proposed zoning, so we are asking to change the zoning to a site-specific B zone. This is a 3 to 6 family dwelling zone. We're asking to amend some of the performance standards. So as you can see from the site plan, we were asking to have the building a little bit closer to the property line, quite a bit closer than the zoning allows currently. So we're asking for a 2.5-meter setback there. We're asking to, the design that we've picked for this site, we're asking for a B zone, but as much as possible, we're trying to pull the standards of the A5 zone, the current zoning on the site. So the side yards that are proposed are consistent with the A5 zone. They're not permitted, they don't meet the requirements of the B zone, but they would meet the requirement of the A5 zone. So that's the idea about some of these standards. The building height is similarly, we're not asking for any relief from building height because it's proposed to have a height that would fit with the A5 zone. It's 10.67 meters high. We are asking for a little bit of relief in terms of lot coverage. The site can meet the landscaped open space requirement of 30%. It can also meet all of the parking that's provided and provide all the parking that's required, and accommodate the required stormwater management infrastructure. We're asking for a little bit of relief in density as well, to go up to 74 units per net hectare. This is within the medium density range in the official plan. We're asking to reduce parking stall sizes a little bit, not too much, but this is not, we generally ask to go down to 5.2 meters. We haven't gone there at this point in time. We can meet the landscaped open space and meet all of the functional needs of the site without going down to that length. So we'd like to have a little bit of flexibility, and that's why we're proposing the 5.5 meters. We're also asking to reduce the parking stall size for bicycle parking spaces to give a little flexibility to have wall-mounted spaces and to allow the handlebars to overlap. So kind of a common requirement that we ask for to be amended. We're also asking to amend the distance that the front porch can extend to the front lot line. So generally speaking, there's 2 standards that have to do with the front yard projection. There's the distance that a porch can extend from the house, and then how close that porch can be to the front lot line. So in this case, the front step would extend, it would comply with the requirement in terms of how far it extends from the dwelling, but it's a little bit too close to the property line, so we're asking to amend that requirement. So that's the extent of the proposed amendment, the proposed application. It's our opinion that this is compatible intensification. It's a built form that fits with the neighborhood. It more efficiently uses the site than what's there now, vacant land. And it's outside of any flood risk hazard area, and I can explain that if there's any questions about it. It conforms to the official plan. It provides a nice mix of residential types in proximity to active transportation, to community facilities, to open space, to commercial land. And the site is going through site plan control approval. So we submitted an application for site plan control, which is going to be required for dealing with the technical aspects of the site, as well as certain aspects of the look and feel of the dwelling. So with that, Mr. Chair, I welcome any questions and comments.
Thank you. So I will turn to the, if there are any questions or. Oh, you're right. It's been a long day already. I will turn to staff to comment on the process we've followed up till now. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, statutory notice was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. Notice was posted on site 20 days in advance of the meeting. A mail-out went to 120-meter radius of the subject property, 20 days in advance to 96 property owners. A courtesy notice was placed in the WIG on April 25th, and to date, we've received 2 pieces of correspondence on the file.
Thank you very much. I will now turn to the committee, and if there are any questions or concerns to ask of the presenter, this is for questions only. Comments will come later. So, yes, Councillor Hutchison.
I have one question. Just wondered if the proponent considered the parking, and rather than having the lawn at the back of the park, consider putting the lawn closer to the house, the parking at the back.
Through you, I would ask for clarification, if you could help.
Show the, if you show the schematic there. Yeah, that's it, yeah. You see where you've got the parking and then lawn. Did you try to reverse it? Have you ever tried to reverse it? So the lawn is actually closer and more useful to the people who live in the house.
Understood. Through you, Mr. Chair. This design is the most efficient stormwater management perspective needed for house a swale. So if we were to kind of reverse it, all of the drainage runs to the south. Most of the drainage on the site runs to the south. So that's the lowest point on the site. So that having the swale and the grassed area in that location makes best use of that feature.
I might have a quiz later, but fine.
Thank you. Seeing none, I just had one quick question, if the Vice Chair can.
Take the chair, Museum.
Thank you. I think I maybe have mentioned this with another development. Our official plan strongly recommends where we're adding hard surface to a site like we are here for parking, that the developer consider the permeable hard surfaces that are now available that allow some drainage rather than pooling and icing and those issues with the traditional hard surface. It's not a shall, it's a should in our official plan, but if you could consider that, it would be money well invested, if you can share that with. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll explore that with our civil engineer.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Seeing no more questions, we'll open it for the public. I will just give a quick summary. Anybody who wishes to speak is given 5 minutes. All of the questions are gathered and answered en masse at the end of the public consultation. And the developer and our staff are here to answer those questions. So there's microphones on both sides. If anybody wishes to speak, just move to a microphone. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K, 4J4. So I want to thank the presenter for clear presentation, good report, and I like the design. I've walked around the neighborhood a number of times and recognized both those houses that you compared it to. It seems the design is very efficient. Do have a number of, I guess, sort of minor comments. You're asking for a fair number of relief provisions, but it seems to me that nothing is, excessive or unusual. So I wouldn't object to anything that you're asking for there. Just looking at the diagram that you have up there now, With respect to the parking, I'm wondering if there's enough room in the back for turnarounds for cars if you have, say, fairly full conditions. If you have, say, a maximum number of cars that are parked at a given time, when someone wants to drive out, is there enough room for them to turn around and do so? So that's one concern. With respect to the bike parking, is that actually covered over or is it out in the open? And then I would refer to one of the letters that's in the addeds tonight concerning the sidewalk. That seems to be very important to me. It is an older neighborhood, and we heard from the writer that the sidewalk on the other side isn't possible because of the conditions there. So perhaps the design could be adjusted slightly to allow for the construction of a sidewalk in front of the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, if you want to move to any of these that microphone works. Thank you. And if you could just identify yourself with your name and address, that would be great. Thank you.
Oh, great. Good evening. Thank you. Kimberly Sandaluk, 15 Grange Street. I'll echo some of the sentiments with the design. I think we're pleased to see that it's something that's in keeping with some of the other homes in the area. That's certainly nice to see. And I would also commend the designers on putting the parking in the rear. I think that's also nice to see, just for keeping things visually appealing. So that's a positive. I would express some concern about the relief being requested for the minimum front setback. 2.5 meters, the proposed seems not very much, and I'm a little bit concerned about how the structure may impose on the front, the street front. And tied to that is a concern that there are currently two mature trees that we saw pictures of with the picture that you showed earlier, and what the impact of the proposed 2.5 meters would have on those existing trees. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, like an auctioneer, going, gone. So I will turn to the planner to address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and address the questions in the order that they came in. First question had to do with, is there sufficient room for vehicles to turn around? So when we laid out this parking lot, we did lay out the turning around radii that vehicles would need to be able to back out of their spaces and get out of the site moving forward. And it works. It's a little bit tight, but the modeling that our designer did show that it did all work. In terms of bicycle parking, yes, the bicycle parking is covered. It'll be covered by the balcony of the floor above. The sidewalk. I don't have a good answer for you on the sidewalk, through you, Mr. Chair. There is a walkway proposed at the front of the dwelling that would provide access to the dwelling itself. Sidewalk wasn't identified as a requirement through the design and preliminary consultation. There are some significant challenges with sidewalks on Green Street because of the grading of the road and the width of the road. So if there's an opportunity to achieve a sidewalk, I can't speak to at this time. In terms of the front yard relief, it is acknowledged that the front yard, the building would be closer to the street than the triplex that previously existed on the house. The front yard setback that's proposed has actually been based on the house that's next door. So the idea being that understood that the building is a little bit larger, but that front yard, that relationship that another dwelling has with the street has already been established, that pattern on the street, on the adjacent property. So that's where that particular setback number came from. It does provide enough separation to accommodate a front step, although we do need a little bit of relief for that front step. In terms of the reduced setback on the trees, will switch to my plan. I did bring, so this plan, what's shown on here is the landscape plan that's proposed. So the combination of front sidewalk and the setback of the house to the front, to those two trees, does mean that both trees will have to come down as a result of this proposed development. So we've proposed 2 new trees. One tree, so that's, I'm gonna use my mouse, so that's shown here. So again, this is Grange Street, and this is the front of the dwelling. Those 2 X's show those 2 trees. One new tree is proposed in the front yard. That's as many trees as can be planted on the front yard, so that's what we're proposing. And another tree is proposed in the rear yard, so we would have 2 new trees planted, but only one would be in the front yard.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there comments from staff? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe Yuko has covered most of the questions, and I just wanted to add on the sidewalk question. This application is subject to site plan approval, so it will have to go through a separate site plan process. We will inquire with our engineering department regarding sidewalks and the feasibility or potential location of sidewalks, and it's certainly something that we can discuss with the applicant through that site plan process, and if it's at all feasible, we would endeavor to encourage the applicant to provide it at least on their property, but we'll have that discussion to see whether it's feasible on this portion of Grange Street or not.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further hands up, I'll turn to the committee. Any comments? Yes, Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, who share the concerns about 2 mature trees being lost, and I wonder if the applicant would be amenable to planting more than just 2 trees, because we know that a mature tree being traded for a new plant is not equivalent in many respects: shading, carbon sequestration, greenage in the neighborhood. So I wonder if perhaps a few more could be planted to make that offset a bit more equal.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's certainly a discussion that we can have, and we can explore that. Through the site plan control, there would be a mechanism for actually achieving that.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments? I will ask the Vice Chair.
Take the chair and recognize you.
Thank you very much. We do have indeed our active transportation master plan, which is a policy saying we need to make for more pedestrian and cycling opportunities. I just want to point out to the neighborhood that there is this development and other developments pay into what's called a development fee at time of construction. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not absolutely sure, I'll turn to staff, but I believe a new sidewalk, not a repair to a sidewalk, but a new sidewalk can be funded from those development fees. And the idea that, as I understand it, neither side of the street has a sidewalk at this time. And there's an opportunity, perhaps, lobby your district councillor to look at the possibility through site plan and through development fees to be able to have a sidewalk on at least one side of the street, whichever side the engineers feel would be most feasible, I would think. So I'll turn to staff to comment on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert on the DC bylaw, so I don't want to confirm 100% that they can be used for sidewalks. It's certainly something that we'll confirm with our engineering and building departments around the appropriate use of DCs, and if it's something that we can encourage in this location, we certainly will. So,
and that with site plan, particularly in plans of subdivision, the developer pays for the addition of sidewalks when they're deemed necessary. So it's definitely worth a consideration. So, and I do want to say that back in my distant past, in the late 90s, I represented this district on council. And I know that, I don't know about this particular property, but I know that there were some properties with with water issues. And so anything that you can do, such as permeable pavement, would be very helpful on this site. Just to let the public know, the proponents have to do a stormwater report, as I understand it, but that's vetted, that's reviewed by our own staff. So, and the rule is that the water cannot be increased over the current situation. So, so that's something that staff do a good job of. So.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly the stormwater management is reviewed through site plan, and additionally, the stormwater management drawings are actually secured in the site plan agreement, and any of the recommendations from a stormwater management report would also be secured and registered against title. So,
Thank you very much. So,
Yield the chair to you.
that's your cue. Seeing no other questions or comments, I want to thank you for your input. Anybody in the community, this will, the comprehensive report will come forward probably in the next couple of months, and you'll have an opportunity to speak again at that stage, and then you'll have right up until council bylaw, up until that time, to file an appeal if you choose to. So, thank you. Thank you very much. So, yeah, thank you. Now we'll turn to a very shortened regular meeting. So I'll call the meeting to order. Approval of an agenda. Councillor Kiley, I saw, made eye contact. Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Carried. We have confirmation of minutes, which we've received electronically from April 18th to be confirmed. If there's a mover and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Osanek. Councillor Kiley. All those in favor? Carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. We have no delegations. We have no briefings. We do have a couple of orders of business. I will very quickly read the public notice for business. The portion of the meeting is open to the public. The city has initiated a new process in which members of the public will have an opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on comprehensive reports presented before the Planning Committee. Those wishing to provide oral comments at this meeting will be invited to do so. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. And our first, and I believe our only issue is concerning Lancaster Drive. And there's a recommendation before us. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is James Barr, and I'm a planner with the city. I'm here tonight to present on the recommendation for 1020 and 1044 Lancaster Drive, which is a zoning bylaw amendment. The purpose and effect of which is to rezone the lands to allow a reconfiguration of their existing access, as well as permit front yard parking in front of the 2 schools. Relief is being sought to both the front yard parking zone regulations of 7626, as well as the minimum intersection angle for the Lancaster Drive entrance. The location of the site is located on the south side of Lancaster Drive. This is south of Woodbine Road, west of Bay Ridge Drive, north of Princess, and east of Collins Bay Road. The site is bordered by the Gardens Walk Park to the south, existing residential development, and Holy Cross Secondary School to the north. Looking at the existing site configuration, this is how it is today. Each site actually operates independent of one another, having two entrances out onto Lancaster Drive with both drop-off loops in front of the school. At the public meeting, working from the top down on this drawing, along Lancaster Drive, bus laybys were proposed in front of both of the schools in between the one-way access aisle, which was proposed to go from Mother Teresa through to Lancaster Drive Public School and back out onto the street. In this drawing, there were long-term parking spaces for the teachers proposed for Mother Teresa on the north side of this access way, as well as short-term parking spaces where parents could get out of the vehicle with their child and walk them in. And along the south side of the access way was proposed parent pickup drop-off spaces. These are intended for parents who will just pull in, drop their kids off, and continue on their way. Mother Teresa also has these proposed in front of their doors. After the public meeting, staff sat down with the applicants, and we combined planning, transportation, and engineering services to look at this, as well as the public comments that we received, and we had a couple collaborative sessions. And eventually the proposal was revised to what is before you today, and we'll work again from the top down with these changes. The bus laybys are not laybys anymore per se, but Lancaster Drive, as you approach the school, will narrow to have two 3-meter drive aisles, so the driving surface will narrow. There'll be barrier curbs on both the north and south side of the drive aisle. The bus parking spaces are technically within the road allowance, but will not actually widen to be full laybys. They're still proposed to be parking along the street, so you have two in front of Mother Teresa, one still on Mother Teresa's property, but on the municipal road allowance, and then additional short-term parking spaces proposed along that south side of the roadway. The one-way drive aisle is still present today, but in front of Lancaster Drive, the short-term parking spaces have been removed and long-term parking spaces have been proposed along the north side for teachers because there was a comment and concern that there would be too much interference with that one-way access aisle, having parents park on the north side and walk their kids across. Along the south side of this access aisle, there are still short-term drop-off spaces as well as short-term parking spaces, and the accessible parking spaces have been moved, which were originally proposed back behind the daycare, back to the front of the site, as well as having the bus parking space for the 30-foot bus in front of Lancaster Drive. Additional visitor parking spaces have been proposed at the back. These are the short-term drop-off spaces where you can get out of your car and walk your kid in because of its proximity to the daycare. This just shows it in a bit more detail for Mother Teresa, so you can see the two bus parking spaces right here. Mother Teresa is served by two 70-foot buses, so the students, when they get out here, will be able to just walk down the access aisle here to the front doors or around to the rear of the building. The one bus parking space proposed for Mother Teresa is there to service Lancaster Drive Public School, and those students will still use the internal access aisle as well as any students dropped off on the north side of Lancaster in those short-term parking spaces. Over to Lancaster Drive, again in more detail, short-term parking spaces proposed along the the south side of Lancaster Drive. And here you can see the accessible parking spaces, short-term parking, and kiss and ride parking. One of the big changes to this site is actually happening off-site on Lancaster Drive. Here, it shows it a bit more. So the typical paving surface there is 8.5 meters wide. That facilitates two drive aisles and one lane of parking on the south side. It's going to narrow in front of the schools to be two 3-meter drive aisles to prevent that on-street parking in irregular places, which is why the more formalized parking spaces along the south side have been established. A barrier curb is going on both the north and south side to help prevent vehicle pull-offs where they are either half on the road or fully off the road and create parking on both north and south side of Lancaster Drive, which was a comment and concern we heard from numerous persons through this process. This is just demonstrating what I was talking about. You can see where parents or anyone dropping their children off at these schools are pulling either half or fully off the road, and you can see this car here. Again, while it's meant to park on the road allowance itself, because the road's supposed to be wide enough for that drive aisle, they still partially pull off the road onto the grassed sidewalk. This being a zoning bylaw amendment, it has to be consistent with the provincial policy statements. A staff review of the provincial policy statement has confirmed that it is consistent with the provincial policy statement. It's located within an urban area. It adds to a mix of uses within walking distance. It's on existing municipal services, and part of this collaborative process was transportation and land use considerations were integrated at all stages of this planning process, so we pulled transportation services in to help consider the options for this site. The lands are designated residential. Residential designation allows for a wide use of residential uses, as well as publicly funded elementary schools are permitted in all lands designated residential. A review of the official plan policies for land use compatibility, front yard parking, and permitted uses confirm that the application conforms to the city's official plan. The subject lands are currently zoned the site-specific open space number 3 zone, which also encompasses the Garden Walk Park and other parks through this subdivision. Each site is now proposed to be rezoned a site-specific OS 24 zone for 1020 Lancaster Drive and OS 25 zone for Mother Teresa to reflect their site-specific circumstances. The zone's broken down here. Each school is proposing to add school as a listed permitted use. The definition of school under the bylaw includes a daycare as a permitted use under that definition. So just to be evidently clear, with these open space zones, they've added that in as part of this application. Mother Teresa, we're allowing 10 non-visitor parking spaces within 1.1 meters of the front yard setback, and visitor parking within 6.5 meters. Lancaster Drive is allowing for 6 non-visitor parking spaces 1.3 meters from the front lot line, and visitor parking within 5.8 meters. Lancaster Drive, in the zoning bylaw, the minimum intersection angle for a driveway with the public road allowance is 60 degrees. They're proposing to recognize what is existing there today, which is 55 degrees, which is a small deviation from the bylaw. We did receive numerous public comments through this application process, all of which are reflected and commented in the staff report. We didn't receive any additional comments between writing the staff report and the public meeting today, so all public comments have been addressed in the report. Just a quick overview of the public comments that had an effect on the application. The accessible parking spaces that were proposed behind Lancaster Drive have been now moved to the front of the school to be accessible to the front doors. Lancaster Drive is being reconfigured to be narrowed for both traffic calming purposes as well as permitting the bus laybys, the bus parking spaces on street rather than in a separate lay-by, which will again have an effect of traffic calming through this area, which is a comment and concern that we heard numerous times through this process. And then it also restricts parking on the north side of Lancaster Drive physically, which is in addition to the no parking signs which will remain on that north side of Lancaster Drive. And on the north side of the drive aisle, the short-term parking spaces that were there for parent drop-off and pick-up have been dedicated to teacher parking, which will be a priority for them to park in first, which will then reduce conflict along that internal access aisle. The recommendation before you tonight is to approve the proposed zoning bylaw amendment tonight because it is consistent in staff's opinion with the provincial policy statement. It conforms to the official plan and it represents good land use planning. I'd be happy to take any questions you have hereout.
Thank you. Turning to the committee, any questions or concerns? Yes, Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I don't really have many questions because so many things have been addressed, and I'll wait for that for the discussion. But it looks like from the report that all these changes the school board wants to make will be for September. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, that is my understanding. It's why part of the recommendation tonight is to forward planning committee's recommendation to the May 8th council meeting, which will help expedite the process for their land use planning approvals to move forward. It just helps their appeal period end around mid-June rather than late June or early July. We are anticipated to receive site plan control applications for both properties, which we will work on rather expeditiously.
Thank you. And my other question is, with regard to coming along Lancaster Drive, I know right now there's 2 speed humps that exist, and this report is talking about making the road more narrow. But I think I also read a few, sometimes it seemed like the report was referring to more than the 2 existing speed humps. Is it true, just those 2 speed humps we have today, that's all there is, that's no more are going to be added?
Regarding the speed humps, they have proposed an addition located on the east side of Lancaster Drive before Limestone, right as you approach the narrowing section of the road allowance to help initiate that traffic calming and lowering of the speed. The existing speed hump is actually around this portion on Lancaster Drive in front of Lancaster Drive Public School, and in their proposal, they're actually going to move it in front of Mother Teresa. They're looking at the spacing in relation to technical guidelines that they have to abide by for the distance between speed humps. And that's why they've proposed the one at the beginning of the narrowing area near Lancaster, the relocation in the middle, and then the existing one, which is located to the west of Mother Teresa.
There'd be 3 speed humps then.
We
Okay.
propose in total, yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, would you mind going back to the picture of the car parked on, do people park on the other side of the road ever, that you're aware of through the studies of this project?
We have been made aware that during drop-off and pickup times throughout the school year that parents or anyone dropping off their kids will park on both the north and south side, even though there are no parking and no stopping signs along the north side of Lancaster.
Okay, has there been any consideration of how to deal with that further other than just the current signage?
As part of this application, there is a requirement to install a barrier curb along the north side of Lancaster Drive. So this is what is currently here is a semi-mountable curb, which makes it very easy for cars to transition up onto the boulevard. The barrier curb will be a physical impediment to cars actually pulling up and off the road allowance.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. And could you
I take the
chair if you would?
and I recognize
Thank
you.
you. I'm channeling Councillor Osanek right now. I'm surprised she didn't talk about trees. Site plan is our opportunity to look at landscaping and trees. And I know from the site, there are a lot of spaces, green spaces, that follow the roadways that would be an opportunity to plant some trees. And where there's an issue with people kind of ignoring the no parking signs and parking on that side of the street, a few trees might be a disincentive for parking along those sides of the street. So if I believe we have some staff here, if they could take that into consideration, that'd be great. So, thank you.
I yield the chair to you.
Thank you very much. Turn to the public if there are any comments to be made, and then we'll go back into committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to staff for a very clear presentation. And I also want to praise the cooperation between the school boards on this. It seems to be excellent. I was at the earlier meeting when this came for the first time. So just really some minor issues. I think we need to have a very high clarity of signage for the new arrangements, right? Because it's a fairly big change over what we had before. So I'd like to make that point. You're going to be narrowing Lancaster Drive, and I'm just wondering if that's going to have any impact on, say, the snow management issues. Okay, so the question is, are you going to require that traffic come on Lancaster Drive from the west only? Or are you going to allow traffic from the east to come in and then turn across the eastbound lane so as to come into the arrangement that you're setting up? So from a practical matter, it seems to be impossible really to enforce that, right? People are coming in from both directions. So, but if you're going to allow the cut across, then you're looking at possible traffic tie-ups and that kind of thing. So, just wondering if you figure there's enough time to complete the project over the summer by September? And I remember from the earlier presentation, there was some discussion on the common practice of pedestrians coming across at that point to and from Holy Cross Secondary. So I'm just wondering if there might be some signs put up to make people aware of that. People are going to catch on, they know the neighborhood and so forth, but just looking at, say issues around liability, that kind of thing, to be aware that it's a busy zone, there's a lot going on. People walk around looking at their phones these days, they're not necessarily aware of what's around them, so just want to prevent, any accidents from occurring through, clear instructions if we could. So thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. To answer the question about signage, signage will be important and reviewed at the time of site plan control. For the site, it will include things like entrance and exit signs to really delineate that this is a one-way drive aisle, as well as anything related to the pedestrian crossing, which happens internal too. I think signage and pavement markings will go hand in hand as part of the site plan review. Regarding narrowing of Lancaster Drive and snow issues, Public Works and Engineering were involved in the review of this application, and they have no concerns with it as proposed at this time. So that's what I can speak to in regard to that. Regarding traffic movements from both east and west on Lancaster Drive into the subject lands, there's going to be no restriction that I am aware of right now from Public Works or Engineering about maneuvers into the site. So coming into the Mother Teresa one-way entrance, you'll be able to come into that entrance from both the west and east approach. Same with exiting, you'll be able to make a left and or right out of that entrance. Regarding pedestrian movements between Holy Cross Secondary School and Lancaster Drive Public School and Mother Teresa Public School, that is a comment that we have heard before, as I think people do try and cross there when older brothers and sisters are dropping their brothers and sisters off at the elementary schools and then going to the secondary schools. The site was reviewed by bylaw to have a crossing guard out there or an enforcement officer for that purpose. It was deemed not to be required at this time. There is a four-way stop intersection at Limestone and Lancaster that does have pedestrian crossing, and it's within a short walking distance of the site, so pedestrians are encouraged to use that physical crossing and not cross in front of the schools.
Thank you very much. I'll turn back to the committee. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, if someone would care to move it and second it, we'll put it on the floor. Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. Councillor Sanik, Councillor Hutchison. So, seeing no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. And I want to thank staff and the school boards for doing an excellent job on this proposal. So, that was our one and only issue tonight. Are there any? There are no motions. Are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, any other business? Seeing none, we did receive the one piece of correspondence for the public meeting. The date and time of our next meeting is May 16th, right here at 6:30 p.m. Adjournment. Quick. You can pick anybody as mover, anybody as seconder.